Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes, just to make sure we can all join in this evening. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Welcome, everyone. All right. We'll give it just about a minute. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in 1 minute. Welcome, welcome. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kendra, and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the New York Transit Museum. This evening's program, Omni, New York's new fare payment system, is part of our Transit After Hours series, which is a series of conversations, workshops, and presentations inspired by the museum's exhibitions and collections. So before we start this evening's program, I want to tell you a bit about the museum in case you haven't visited us before. So Wayne, if you can go to the next slide. Awesome. So we opened in 1976 as part of the bicentennial as a New York City Transit exhibition. We became the Transit Museum in the 1980s. We're located in a decommissioned IND subway station in downtown Brooklyn. We have a gallery and shop in Grand Central Terminal that is going to reopen really soon. We're really excited. And we have programs for all ages. And in a non-pandemic year, we serve over 500,000 visitors. So I would like to quickly add that if you would like closed captions this evening and you're on a computer, you can click where it says live transcript at the bottom of your screen, which is below the CC button, and select show subtitle. If you're on a phone or tablet, you can turn on captioning by clicking more in the meeting settings. We also invite you to use the Q&A functions to ask questions this evening. And now I'll briefly introduce our panelists this evening. From the MTA, we have Wayne Lydon, Director of MTA Payment Fare Programs. We have Dante Brunetti, Director of Operational Applications, and Eddie Giha, Deputy Director of Capital Contracting and Facilities. And joining us from Cubic Transportation Systems is Christian Henry, their Vice President of Programs. So after the presentation, we'll have time for Q&A. So please submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now, without further ado, I'll hand it to Wayne to start the presentation.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Wayne Lydon, proud to be leading the Omni project. And I've been with the MTA since 1988. And so I worked on the introduction of MetroCard. So this is a very interesting time for me to be working on the retirement of MetroCard and bringing Omni to you. Tonight's presentation is going to be primarily focused on bringing Omni to reality and how we got here, including some of the challenges that were addressed going through the pandemic. And we'll touch lightly upon where we're going in the future. But tonight's presentation is meant to be not all comprehensive, not super technical, but really just to tell you a story about Omni and how we got where we are today. I'd just like to add one last thing, since Kendra did talk about the Transit Museum. I'd just like to say I was at the not at the opening, but I went to the Transit Museum in 1976 when it first opened, and I'm looking forward to the actual museum opening again soon. So Omni history. What can I tell you about Omni? Some things you may know already. Some things are very public. Some things kind of hidden behind the scenes. So Omni, before we actually got started, was formerly known as the New Fare Payment System Project. And the goal of the project is to really replace the existing fare collection systems for New York City Transit, Long Island Railroad, and Metro North Railroad. And some people have said, why spend all this money and why are you doing this now? And the answer is, well, if you look just at the MetroCard side of things, MetroCard was introduced in 1994. And so it really has outlived its useful life. And if you think of it this way, how many of you still have a personal computer in your house that you had from 1994? That's not the way technology works these days. So it's really time to retire the old equipment and move into the 21st century. Now, this has already been a decade-long journey of moving towards a new system. We've been talking about smart cards, and a lot of you savvy New Yorkers are people who have traveled all around the world, and you know that the actual technology of smart cards is not new. But we wanted to make sure we get it right because New York is the biggest transit system in North America, and we can't afford to make any mistakes. And there were certainly mistakes made at other agencies. This project is a design-build project, which requires extensive scoping of requirements. And what I mean by design-build, for those of you who are not in the capital program management or construction industry, it really means that instead of going to the contractor up front and saying, I wanted to do this, this, and this, and this, this, and this, and this is exactly how you're going to do it, that can lead to stagnation. That can lead to you getting stuck with old technology as you go through the bidding process and you go through the entire contractual process. Design build, the approach in design build is to basically say, I need a system that does this, and you list all the requirements, and then you give the vendor the opportunity to actually give the specific means of achieving those goals. So at the time when you're going through those specific goals and requirements, you can then pick the technologies that are current and take full advantage of them when you're building out the project. We did go through a competitive bidding process, which resulted in a contract award to Cubic Transportation Systems in November of 2017. And what I will acknowledge here is that Cubic was also the winning vendor on the MetroCard project, so that there was a certain familiarity that Cubic brought to the project in terms of all of the portions that are relevant to New York City Transit, which is a big portion of the project. And as most of you know, the public pilot or the introduction of Omni was launched, excuse me, on May 31st, 2019. And so we called it an open loop public pilot. And what do I mean by open loop? And here's what makes Omni quite different from some of the other projects that have launched. Open loop refers to the fact that you're not using an MTA card for access to the system at this point in time. What customers are using to pay for Omni is a contactless credit or debit card that already belongs to them, or a digital wallet on a cell phone or some other digital device. So essentially, we've launched the Omni system initially without using or launching an MTA Omni card. And what this allowed us to do, first of all, we started small. We started with, well, small is a relative term. We've started with a small number of stations on the IRT line, on the Lex line, from Atlantic Terminal in Brooklyn to Grand Central in Manhattan, 16 stations, which in a lot of other cities actually comprise their whole transit system. And when I say small, we launched at the same time the entire borough of Staten Island, all of their buses. So it was small for us, but it was pretty large pilot. And really what it did was it allowed us to make sure that the technology was working, which we knew it would, but it also allowed us to stand up the back end because the back end is the computing system behind Omni that basically controls all of the payments and does all the logic for transfers and the like. Now, I'll go into take you in a fun direction. When we first started the project, we didn't have a real name for the project. And as I mentioned earlier, it was the new fare payment system. And so most of the documents that got circulated or memos or emails that got exchanged, everything referred to NFPS. And as most of you probably know, the MTA and New York City Transit and the railroads are really good at throwing around all these acronyms. We knew that this wasn't going to work and that we needed to call this something. So we actually had to bring in an expert. And in this case, we brought in a consulting firm called Pentagram that really is an expert on branding. And I would also like to say that when MetroCard was first being introduced, the MTA went through a similar process to come up with the name MetroCard. In this case, we brought in this high-level expertise and we sat in rooms with MTA executives and high-level management. And what I will say is I come from a more technical background, so being part of the branding process was actually eye-opening for me. Very interested to see how the creative minds work and how they come up in the beginning with winners and some real clunkers, losers, you know. The other point being is that you have, for example, the head of New York City Transit, the head of Long Island Railroad, the head of Metro North, and the chairman of the MTA all sitting in a room. And these are people who are very opinionated and feel very strongly about certain things. And so you might have a name that really indicates something that's very strongly and closely associated with New York City, for example. And the railroads are like, well, you know, we're more than the subways are very New York City and the buses are very New York City, but we're also Connecticut. We're also Nassau and Suffolk, and we don't want something that's so city oriented. So you had a lot of back and forth, you know, push and pull, give and take. And I remember sitting next to the person from the branding agency who was coordinating, and I said, "This has been really a fascinating process, and it seems very stressful. And how do you control such a thing?" And what she said to me was, "You know how when two parents, you know, they're expecting a baby and they have to sit there and come up with a baby name." She said, well, this is like coming up with a baby's name, except instead of having two parents, you have 17 or 25 parents. And I said, well, that's why I feel that it's very stressful. So I'll just share with you, as you see on the screen, some of the other names that were considered. And this by no means is the full list, but this is a list of some other names that were considered for Omni. Liberty, to me, that was a little bit too obvious, but some people felt it was a liberty, the freedom to travel anywhere in the metropolitan region, right? Dash, let's indicate that it's something that's fast and moving. Tongue-in-cheek was bada bing. I'm not a true Sopranos fan, but to me, bada bing, I told the creative person, this is not New Jersey Transit, this is New York City. Whoosh, which also another indication of speed and getting where you want it to go. The next one was go, go, go. If you think about standing behind somebody on an ATM line and they don't know how to use the ATM and you're waiting there and you're just thinking, come on already, go, go, go. And the same thing at a turnstile. If somebody's blocking you at a turnstile, you just want to keep moving. And you're telling the person, even if you're not telling them directly in your head, you're saying, come on already, go, go, go. And then finally, one of my favorites, and people look at it and say, what? Are you kidding me? Pretzel. Pretzel, that's right. So what's more New York than the pretzel that you get from the corner hot dog stand, especially the ones that are really well done and that are heated, not to the point where they taste like cardboard, but they really do taste wonderful, like the ones I used to get as a child. Some people said, well, how do you equate the pretzel with the transit system or the train system? And I said, well, I can understand it. You look at a subway map and you have this web, this tangle of subway lines, and you can sort of say that they're twisted like a pretzel. What was really brought out during this branding session was that it's hard to, in a vacuum and up front, to really come up with names, and then to understand that if it's really done right, that 6 months later, after you've introduced the brand, and if you've done it right, you come up with a name that sort of people agree that, oh, I can't imagine it being named anything else. So when they came up with Omni on the list, one of the first things we said, and it was first just Omni, and we were like, the first part was bring me some peace, bring me some relaxation. And it was so contrary to what we feel is our experience on the subway train or even on the railroads. And we thought, this is for people to chant and calm down a little. They need to do their in the New York transit system. But then we also realized that Omni, if you look at it as an acronym, could stand for One Metro New York. And really, the thought process behind the entire Omni project is, although we're starting with 3 agencies, New York City Transit, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad, the point is it's going to be a regional system. And for example, for those other agencies that currently use MetroCard for fare payment, they'll be able to join the Omni system, and they will be Omni as well. And we didn't want it to be something that was so obviously MTA, because Omni itself will go beyond MTA and will include other agencies in the region. First will be the agencies that accept MetroCard, and then once we get them onboarded, then we're looking to go and explore with other interested parties, and there are other interested parties that might be joining the Omni system. But it was meant to be a regional system, and so One Metro New York really, that felt right, and we felt that it was telling a good story. Once the name was decided upon, Pentagram also introduced a style guide, which was really very specific recommendations about the fonts to be used in different formats, in different customer channels. So for example, the way you communicated on an advertising screen versus the way you communicate Omni in an app or communicate Omni on the web. But it was really a very specific style, and that they came up with the actual the split font that you see that the Omni logo is in, and they have a whole bunch of recommendations. That it's primarily black and white, but then you introduce elements of color sparingly that represent the colors of the subway lines or the colors of the railroad lines. So that's just to give you a little bit of the behind the scenes, what went into naming Omni. At this point in time, I'm going to turn the screen over to my colleague, Eddie Giha, who's going to tell you a little bit about the process of getting Omni installed on buses and subways. Take it away, Eddie.
Thank you, Wayne. Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me. I'd like to thank Kendra and the New York Museum, Transit Museum, for inviting us and allowing us to share how we installed Omni throughout the subway and bus system. Let me be straight and clear that it was a huge undertaking, but what the thing was, what made it successful? How were we able to install the Omni system in such a vast a vast transportation system? So one thing I like to share then is to say, with any great project comes the key things about planning and coordination, and basically advanced planning and coordination was one of the key things that we had to establish from the beginning of this project. And what we did was basically contacted all our agencies, because as Wayne says, this is a multi-agency project, and we had to contact all our agencies to get them to buy in, to get them to understand what it would take to get this done. And also all the departments and divisions that are within all these agencies. As you can see, subways has many divisions. There's so many people involved. So how do we, to get them to buy in and to get them to partner with us, we have to do this. So, advanced planning and coordination, and also working with our partner, Cubic, on this was critical, because as you can see, we were happy that Cubic was selected because we know that they have a history of delivering projects, especially in New York with the MetroCard, as Wayne mentioned. and also that they understand New York. You know, with their history here, they have, and for MetroCard, they have a great understanding of what New York really needs in a new fare payment system, and how to manage the expectations of New York City. So we were happy that happened. So as you can see, you know, getting all our contractors, getting all our agencies together took some planning, took a lot of meetings and a lot of coordination. And there were some dependencies that needed to happen. We had to get departments like the electronic maintenance division, which basically oversees or manages the maintenance of our turnstiles and the things within the station. And then we had the Department of Bus, which basically manages and oversees, you know, access and maintenance on our buses. Getting them and having them give us access to the devices, to the buses by our teams, especially during the overnight, because all the work pretty much happened during the nighttime, so that we didn't disrupt the majority of our customers during the day. So we did all the work at night, and as you can see, that brings on its own challenges, you know, getting people around when you don't have bus service and subway service as often. But you know, those are challenges that occurred. But working with these departments and these companies helped us achieve this. So how did we get all this done by the end of 2020? Because that was the goal. The goal was to complete everything by the end of 2020, especially for the major installations, and getting the what we call Omni readiness. How do we get Omni ready, or the infrastructure ready for Omni? And that's by having what we call the infrastructure upgrade. We had to perform an upgrade of the system. One good thing is we leveraged existing turnstiles, which was good, because we didn't have to go out there and buy new turnstiles. We leveraged the existing turnstiles. We leveraged the current buses that we had, but we had to upgrade their infrastructure because, as you know, this is a technology project, a communications project, and the way, you know, taps and credit card information and all that gets uploaded to a back office, as Wayne mentioned, is through a network, a communications network. So we had to upgrade all our subway stations, including Staten Island Railway, and all our buses, New York City Transit and MTA Bus Company, and get their infrastructure prepared to receive what we call the Omni reader. So the Omni hardware, so we had to do this in multiple phases. So the Omni hardware pretty much was done in phases, where we did the network infrastructure first, because that had to get done. We had to retrofit the buses and turnstiles and to prepare them. And what we do is we call the hardware mounts on the turnstiles, we call it a shroud. And you probably could see when you approach a turnstile, what you'll see is the reader on a rectangular or triangular device, and underneath that or inside of that is harnesses and cables within what we call a shroud. So we had to prepare that and connect that or attach it to an existing turnstile. So you're talking about drilling, you're talking about routing new cables, new harnesses. So that took some time to do. Connecting, running conduit to what we call our access nodes on the stations. Having teams run cabling for both communication cables and power cables. So that was done on our first phase of this. And future phases where we will roll out now additional equipment and getting that bolted in or connected to the infrastructure. So you're looking at putting readers on auto gates, what we call ADA auto gates, using onboard validation devices on our buses so that we can validate when our customers pay. We're going to roll out what we call the Omni vending machines, where you're going to be able to purchase later on an Omni card. Those are things that are coming down. You're going to be able to interact via our customer service centers, and where there will be customer service equipment, where you're going to be able to look at your account, to be able to, you know, for our reduced fare customers, they'll be able to go there and actually interface with a person one-to-one and look at their account and to service them. So those are the things that are coming in our future phases. But all this had to be done in an aggressive timeline. Like I said, the end of 2020 was it. And what happens when you have a aggressive timeline, you're set with a project, you have your goals, but then there are changes that come in. And as you know, in any major project, changes are about to come in. And one of the big changes that came on was the directive to prepare our buses for all-door boarding. Initially, that wasn't something, we were just gonna outfit the front of the buses. But when we were told, no, we wanted you to prepare our buses for all-door boarding, when and if that occurs, we would have it ready. So that meant going back into the design, looking at how we get all the cabling and all the power cables to the rear doors and to the middle doors of the buses, and doing that while the team was still working out there. So it was a difficult thing. And then came COVID, and as everybody know, that became something that's just stopped us on our tracks. COVID is something that we're still dealing with, but thank God we are coming out of it in New York. So it's a good thing to see that. But it did cause a delay, and that delay really gave us a chance to pause. But also we had to develop new guidelines, new cleaning procedures. And as you know, we shut the system down for a period of hours during the overnight. But it gave us a chance to revamp our procedures and our safety procedures to make sure our workers were working in a safe environment. So while we had that shutdown, we were developing these procedures in preparation for when we restarted. And we restarted 43 days later, and we just took off. I mean, the teams, our management teams, Cubics installation teams, and their manager, we worked together, and Department of Bus teams. I have to say, it was a cohesive effort to really work together to accomplish this. So Wayne, if you can go to the next slide. So that was, I was excited that we did that. Wayne, next slide, please.
Did it come up?
Yeah, got it. So some of the key things that we've done is, you see subway and Omni installation on subway and bus. So what was the process? Well, you know, we go through a series of steps we had to establish. And one of the first things is what we do is surveys. It's important to understand what are you facing when you go onto a subway station and onto a bus. And because we have different bus types in our bus system, and we have so much, our stations are so vast and so different. Sometimes we have to understand what do we face when we get out there. So we first have to survey every single station and every single bus or bus type, and then we have to prepare what we call drawings and installation procedures, and then those have to be reviewed, and then those have to be approved. So because we do not step out and change or tackle anything unless we get approval. So those drawings and procedures have to be reviewed and approved. Then we perform what we call prototype installation. We go out there and we do a first installation just to see what we're gonna face as we install. And again, those revealed issues will give us an opportunity to retweak and to readjust certain things in the procedures, and sometimes even in the design of what we're installing. Then at that point, we go system wide and we install the communication and the power cables throughout the whole system, every single bus, every single subway. And later on, I'll show you some of the stats, and some of them is pretty mind blowing when you think about the accomplishments that we did in such a vast system. Then we had to, like you said, this is basically a technology project, and in that kind of a project, you know, the communication system has to be upgraded. So we upgraded the network switch in every station, every bus. We had to install it, and we had to test those new configurations. And then we go about installing the Omni readers, and then there's what we call a commissioning and testing phase for every single reader to make sure that it's performing properly before we put it in service. So I don't know if you remember when we were first rolling this out, a lot of the readers said coming soon. Well, that was at that time we would test it, verify that it worked, and place it in coming soon until we were ready to turn it on to the public. So all this is really governed by a quality assurance process and control that's really put into place, and that, you know, MTA and all its agencies follow, and we hold all our vendors to make sure that they follow these standards, and that makes what we call a quality installation and a quality product that's there. Next slide, please, Wayne. So during the reader installation, as you can see, I'll look on the left-hand part of the slide, and that shows you what the subway turnstile installation. You see the teams working on the devices, and basically in the front of each turnstile, you see the shroud, especially on the first three, and then they're working inside upgrading cables. But basically, between the cable and the shroud, those are some of the, especially the shroud, it's really the first change or the noticeable design change to the turnstile profile in over 25 years. Other than that, nothing has really changed on our turnstile. Those have been, these are the original turnstiles that Cubic designed back in the 80s, and we installed in the 90s, early 90s, and they have been functional. They've proved themselves year after year after year, and their record for reliability is extraordinary. And you know, this change was the first change we've done in over 25 years on this turnstile. So you see that the housing had to change, the cabling had to change. We had to run Ethernet into them so that it could support a communications network that it didn't have before. It was a different network that the original turnstiles had. So that was a big undertaking. And on the bus, very similar problem. How do you get electronics on the bus? You need to support it by having a network, a bus network. So again, we have to install switches on the bus. We have to install cabling on the bus. We have to install power on the bus. And as you see now, your buses that are riding out there in a system, moving our passengers, they are a technology wonder. They have customer information displays. They have a USB port. They have Wi-Fi on the bus. So, you know, those all have to communicate on the network. And our Omni reader communicates on that same network. So we had to prepare and the mounts and the locations of each door to be able to accept that reading. Next slide, please, Wayne. So, like I said before, COVID was a huge impact to us, and you know, it brought the world to a standstill. It really did, and we're just starting to come out of it, America and especially New York. You know, as we were recently told, you know, 70% of our citizens now are vaccinated or have at least the first shot of vaccinations, and that's basically a marker that New York was looking to before we really started turning things back on, or laxing some of the restrictions. So that during the beginning of COVID, it caused a serious problem to us. It impacted us. It impacted manufacturing, and the idea or our thinking of how do we get restarted on this again. So that's where I talked about before, by changing our health and safety policies to make sure that our workers work in a safe environment. That you know, we were prepared that, you know, adding these new restrictions did cause additional installation times, but we knew that with the schedule, we couldn't afford to let that affect us. So it was basically all hands on deck. Let's push forward and let's get this done for New York. Because one thing is, what this Omni afforded us was the ability to access our transit system in a contactless manner. You didn't have now to touch the turnstiles per se to get in anymore. You could have just tapped without having to touch anything. Turnstile would release and you could walk in. So that was another thing why, and New York was expecting this. Our customers were expecting this. So this is another reason why we knew we had to push forward. So between those days that we lost, we were able to complete the installation by year's end of 2020. So we were very excited about that. Next slide, Wayne. So here were some of the stats I was saying, and we said, how did we get omnified? And again, that's a term that we'll coin. We'll say New York City and then the MTA will coin the word omnified, because we did. We as Alpha Trade, like I say, you know, what time is it? Well, it's Omni time. Well, you know what? To get Omni time, you gotta omnify the system. So right now we have over 16,000 plus Omni readers out there. Not too many people could realize that's a lot of readers, 16,000 plus. In our 472 subway stations, we have 3,763 turnstiles, 485 what we call the high entry exit turnstiles, and then 482 what we call the AFAS gates or the auto gates. We have 93 local network connections on these stations, and we've installed 30+ miles of subway conduit and over 56 miles of subway communication cable. On our buses, we have over almost 12,000 bus mounts and bus readers on our subways. Over 4,000 network switches were installed, and over 95+ miles of bus communication cables installed. So when you look at these numbers, you know, all I can say basically is wow, because it's a lot of work. And between the Cubic installation team, our managers who oversaw all the installation teams, who worked with the Department of Buses, who got us the buses into the depots overnight, who got the stations ready for us to prepare our workers to work in those stations overnight, to control their environment it took a lot of work, it took a lot of coordination, and it took a lot of effort. So I just wanted to really thank Cubic and thank our team members really for all the hard work that they did to achieve this. And the next slide that we're going to show basically shows a group picture and a lot of the people that participated and that really helped push this across, because it was a vast effort. And I really would like to give them some credit, and I give them really all the credit for the work we've done. And you can see from the MTA people on the left-hand side to the Cubic personnel on the right-hand side, a lot of people made an effort and put a tremendous amount of work to get the system installed and allow what we call the early phases to get established. And there's still more to come. And from that, I'll pass it over back to Wayne, and Wayne, you can take it from here.
Well, actually, I would like to pass it over to Christian, who's going to talk a little bit about the Omni transition and give you a little bit of a Cubic perspective.
Thank you.
Happy to take that pass. Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Eddie. Hi, everybody. Christian Henry. I'm the Omni Program Director for Cubic. First, I'd like to thank the New York Transit Museum and the MTA for this forum to be able to share a little piece of the Omni story. At Cubic, we know we have a tremendous responsibility to deliver a system worthy of the New York region, and it's something we're passionate about and take a lot of pride in. Without the amazing partnership we've forged with the MTA, none of it would be possible. And the work is challenging, the stakes are high, but together we're making it happen. Looking back to the start of the program, one of the great challenges we faced was how would we design, develop, deploy a new fare payment system that not only provided customers equal or better functionality to MetroCard, but did so while operating in parallel to MetroCard for several years so that the MTA and its customers could make a smooth transition. While much of the physical infrastructure to support MetroCard on buses and subways was pre-existing, Cubic and MTA needed to find ways to build upon that so that Omni could be deployed without disrupting MetroCard. Behind the customer-facing devices, significant upgrades to the communication infrastructure and backend were required that provided an opportunity for future expansion and allowed for the decommissioning of the obsolete elements when MetroCard eventually sees its final swipe. The Omni readers that everyone sees in the subways and on the buses get the attention, but the tremendous efforts that occur behind the scenes are what make the system function. MetroCard has served the MTA and its customers well for nearly 30 years and has become part of the fabric of New York. While many still fondly remember the tokens, card-based operation of MetroCard is the only thing many riders know, and one reason they need to spend more time at the New York Transit Museum, of course. The MetroCard concept was basic: add value or pass to a card and use that card until it was time to reload or get another card. Rinse, wash, repeat. Moving to an account-based system with Omni changes a lot more than just the concept of tapping instead of swiping. It expands the capabilities of what the system can do, not only within the context of the MTA, but at a regional level. But of course, with the more options come the need for more decisions and more education for customers. One of the big changes with the implementation of Omni was the introduction of open payments and the ability for customers to use their own contactless cards or mobile devices so they could tap and go without the need to preload a card. MTA's strategy to lead the Omni launch with open payments, especially at a time when contactless payments were still relatively new to New York, may have been unconventional, but it has certainly paid off as the continual growth of the system shows. With PayGo transactions, operating costs associated with media distribution, machine maintenance, and management of cash are all greatly reduced. For customers, Open Payments provides my favorite benefit of Omni, which is never having to stand online to purchase or reload your MetroCard. While the initial launch of Omni focused on acceptance of Open Payments and completion of rollout to all subways and buses, the current focus of the program supports the transformation of the MTA and will allow for the alignment of New York City Transit, Long Island Railroad, and Metro North Railroad under a common platform. With this work comes a substantial amount of integration between both new and legacy systems, as well as the migration of data from disparate systems to support more centralized operations and opportunities. As you can imagine, this is no small undertaking, and just as we need to manage customer comprehension of transitioning from a card-based system to an account-based system, we also need help to help operators realize the differences and benefits this change offers. The objective is not to find a way to simply recreate what exists today. Collectively, we are building the future of transportation in the New York region, and that is something that is just incredible to be a part of. To talk more about Omni today and where Omni is heading, I'm going to let Wayne take it back.
Thank you, Christian. So just to give you some fun facts about where we're at with Omni. Ready, set, tap. So we started on May 31st, 2019 with the first tap, and we had 6,000 payments on the first day. By early March of 2021, just as we're sort of coming out of COVID now, we had 50 million taps, and that was after having lost probably 60% of ridership in the transit system during the peak of COVID. By mid-May, we were already up to 75 million taps, and as of today, we're at 92.5 million taps. And on an average weekday, we have about 580,000 customers tapping to pay for Omni with Omni, and our highest day so far it was 613,000 taps, which was last Friday. It's amazing to see that the numbers just continue to go up every week. It's a testament to the success of Omni and how easy the system is, but it's also it's as a native New Yorker, it feels great to me to see it's an indication that people are coming back to mass transit, to the subways and the buses, and the bus system is doing extremely well. So we mentioned earlier that the system was completely rolled out by the end of 2020. And so if you look at the first week of 2021 as the first week where everybody could use Omni everywhere in terms of the buses and the subways, as the baseline, bus taps are up more than 200% since the beginning of the year, and subways is up about 115%. It's just amazing, and it's not like we've done extensive advertising. And to acknowledge some of the questions that I've read, I mean, we haven't even opened up the system to everybody yet. So let's talk about where we think we're going. Omni tomorrow, and this is just a sprinkling of some of the things that I thought you might like to hear about. And we're not going to give specific dates today because some of my folks, my colleagues in the press department, you know, they like to make a big splash and talk about things when they're introduced. So this is just to give you a general idea of what's coming. The first thing that for sure is coming is the Omni readers that you see on the turnstiles are being introduced at all of the auto gates in the subway stations. And so that was a special project because the gates require readers actually on both sides of the gate to both enter and to exit the system. And those gates service our customers who utilize wheelchairs. They also service customers who have service animals such as the seeing eye dog. And I think in the future you're going to see those gates being used for people with, you know, large packages, bicycles, and strollers. I saw a question about, well, what about the people who don't have credit cards and don't have electronic devices such as a smartphone? So we will be introducing later this year an Omni card. So sort of look like a MetroCard but black and white, and it will be thicker like a credit card. So it will be pretty much like the standard credit or debit card that you get from a bank, except we think it looks pretty slick. The design has been finalized, but I'm not allowed to show it to you yet, unfortunately. So we'll save that reveal for another time. But that will also be the launch of the retail network. So you'll be able to get Omni cards at stores. If you think about, for example, the way when you go into a drugstore and you see a rack of cards, and you can get a Home Depot card or a Gap card, like a gift card. That's Omni will have its own slot on that rack, and you'll be able to go up to the front cash register and put value into that Omni account. It can be value, it can be other instruments that are offered for sale, but initially it'll be value. And that's coming later this year. These are pretty much all coming this year. And I'll talk about what's coming next year toward the bottom of the page. We're also introducing other fare products, and specifically those fare products for the reduced fare population. So eventually MetroCard is expected to be retired in July of 2023 or thereabouts. And what we have to do is every purpose that is served by MetroCard right now, we have to be able to replicate that or better it in the Omni environment. One of the things we really didn't touch upon, and I really should just bring it to everyone's attention, is that besides running a big fare system, I mean, MetroCard is a pretty complicated fare instrument, and it serves many different populations. It serves the full fare customers with both the time-based instrument and value-based fares. It serves the students, the seniors with reduced fares. It serves the accessibility population. It serves the police, the fire departments, and any number of other, and MTA employees. I can't leave out the MTA and New York City Transit employees. So there are a number of different populations. And then, so one of the key things was we knew that the Omni system could not be rolled out all at once. If you really wanted it, a lot of agencies like this big bang concept where you turn it on overnight. And we really did see that based on some experiences in some of other agencies as a recipe for disaster, quite frankly. And I won't name those other agencies out of some respect and not being a tattletale. But we knew that if we tried to replace the entire MetroCard system and the systems that are used, you know, the vending machines, for example, that are used for Metro North and Long Island Railroad, that was a recipe for disaster. And fortunately, the MTA board agreed with our approach, although we have a very, very aggressive timeline. What it means is that some segments of the customers are introduced earlier in the process. Certain customers are addressed later in the process, but all the while we are maintaining both systems so everybody has full use of the transit system, and that eventually we'll get everybody on board, and that's when we can say bye-bye to MetroCard. It was a nice run. We can sing a little song for MetroCard. Omni vending machines. So that's probably the last thing we'll see at the tail end of this year. So first we're introducing Omni cards at retail networks. What I wanted to say is, and conceptually, you'd probably agree that, first of all, if you have a bunch of people who have already been sort of groomed to use their credit cards or debit cards or their phones, so now, as mentioned earlier, those are a bunch of people that never have to wait on a vending machine line again. They just walk up to a turnstile, they tap their device, whatever they're using, credit card, debit card, and boom, they're in, and they don't have to think twice about it. So you've removed a whole bunch of people from the lines at the vending machines. Then you introduce a retail network, which gives people the opportunity to buy a card, and that's geared towards specifically for people who might want to use cash, right? Or people who don't want to link their credit or debit card to an Omni account, but they can still use a credit or debit card to buy an Omni card at the retail network, right? And then finally, at the end of this process, for the person who, you know, didn't come into the station with a phone or doesn't want to use their phone, some people don't want to take out their phones in the subway station, or for the person that didn't realize that they should have bought the card upstairs at the Duane Reade or the CVS, you know, they come down into the station, and what are they going to use? So there'll be Omni vending machines. Now, there'll be Omni vending machines in every station, and these machines will be deployed initially at New York City Transit stations, but they're also going to be deployed at Long Island Railroad, stations as well as Metro North stations. And one of the beauties of this system is what we call a configurable vending machine. We're buying all of the same vending machines, and although they will be configured for the individual station, so for example, if you come down the stairs at Bowling Green, the vending machine will sort of have a message that says, welcome, you're at the Bowling Green station on the number 4 and the 5 line. And the first screen and the primary function of that screen will be to sell you a ride or help you with whatever you're trying to do for a New York City Transit ride. However, you can also, at the same machine, you will be able to buy tickets for Long Island Railroad or Metro North. If you're continuing your trip, for example, you get on at Bowling Green, now you're getting off at Grand Central, you can already have your Metro North ticket in hand. So the first vending machines will be on property right at the tail end of the year, and then the rollout both in transit and at the railroads will carry on for all of 2022 and then into the very beginning of 23. And then another item is that we will introduce an upgrade to the railroad mobile ticketing. Right now, railroads do have mobile ticketing. It's called e-tix, and so we're gonna layer on top of that, and we'll essentially replace the e-tix system with an OmniTix system that's built for the railroads. And what you'll see, I mentioned earlier during the branding session about how things are in line with the style guide. What you're going to see is a cohesiveness among all of these different sales channels and the way that we communicate for Omni, so that if you know how to use Omni at a ticket vending machine, you'll know how to use Omni basically on when we introduce an app later on. When we introduce web sales, for example, the screens will have a similar look and feel. Of the user interfaces will be related, so that if you're moving from one Omni venue to another, you're gonna feel like, oh, this is familiar to me. I understand what this is. So that will make the process a lot more intuitive. And the final note on this page is, and more testing. I can't stress enough how much we test everything in a test region, then in a quality assurance region, long before we ever move it out into what we call the production region, which is where you guys are facing the customers. And even when we do move it out to the production region, for example, we can limit things so that it's only introduced in a particular station, and we can make direct observations to make sure, for example, that a change in software programming really resulted in the desired results, and that there weren't any glitches or surprises, I should say. So that's the last item on this page. I bring up the questions page, but I will acknowledge that I've already seen some of the questions that have been raised, and I'll just throw out a couple of answers, and then I'll let Kendra get into the process of, I guess, screening some of the questions. I know there was a question about the cash customers, so I think I covered that in terms of that's what the retail network is for. Omni has to be able to meet the needs of all of our customers, and that means all socioeconomic groups. That means every shape, color, size, form, people with disabilities, people without disabilities. The transit system is for everyone in the New York metro region, and we have to make sure that Omni, by the time we discontinue MetroCard, retire MetroCard, and send it off to the farm, that Omni really can meet the needs of all of our customers. Somebody asked about, well, why are we replacing MetroCard? It does work, and with any technology, you have to acknowledge that there is an end of useful life. And with MetroCard is a magnetic stripe-based system. People have called the card flimsy. I don't call the card flimsy, but they are subject to damage. MetroCard, you need to have lines at the vending machines, and you need to maintain a large number of vending machines. So it was time for the system to be retired, and we wanted to move into the 21st century. And MetroCard was getting a little quirky, and the expenses to maintain an old system rise each year as the technology becomes more and more antiquated. And certain parts, quite frankly, and electronics are harder and harder to find. If you can believe it, there are some. I can tell you that there have been certain instances where, for example, a particular piece of computer equipment, before we upgraded it, that maintainers were buying parts off of eBay from other systems because we couldn't get what we needed anymore. It wasn't being manufactured anymore. So MetroCard has seen better days, and its retirement is well deserved. What I would also like to say about that is Eddie raised a point about how the turnstiles, for example, are so resilient. They really are a clear demonstration of, if you design a good piece of equipment, how things can last. And so what I will say is that, so for example, in terms of minimizing costs, where we could reutilize something that was robust and something that was functioning well, we did. And the prime example of that is the turnstile. So we layered onto the turnstile, we upgraded some of the electronics in the turnstiles, but we kept the base of the turnstile so that we can use that for another few years. And then the replacement of turnstiles, because everything sooner or later has to be replaced, but that can be done in a future capital project, when New York City Transit is ready to do that. I did see also a question about, will Omni be on AirTrain for tourists? So that way you don't have to stop at a vending machine. I know those people who use Port Authority's AirTrain, you come off the plane, you come off the AirTrain, and then you're faced with a long line of people trying to get through those turnstiles. The answer is all of the agencies that currently use MetroCard have all expressed interest in participating in the Omni system, and that we have one person on our team whose main job is to run around and to make deals with these agencies to bring them on board, and to use the term that Eddie brought up earlier, is to get them Omni ready and omnified. So we have to get them Omni ready first before we can just drop Omni equipment in there. But it is, I can't project a timeline right now, but it's not too long into the future where AirTrain and PATH and Westchester Beeline buses and NICE buses, we're all looking at Omni treatments for those regional agencies. Somebody also asked a question about, well, what other agencies have expressed interest? And I can tell you that just about every transit agency has at least attended a couple of seminars and have expressed basic interest, and that includes everybody. For example, the city's East River Ferries, for example, is the first one that comes to mind. But just about every regional transportation provider in the public transportation sphere has been in contact with us. There have been no final contracts signed at this point, and our initial focus is on taking care of the agencies that have MetroCard, since MetroCard is going to be retired. But I think you will be seeing that in the future. Dante, are you with us on the call?
Yes, sir. Yep.
So Dante, I just wanted to, and Dante, I opened it to Dante and to Christian. We had a question, I believe, about privacy and security. If you wanted to talk a little bit about the security of the system.
In terms, well, okay, so basically we use a point-to-point encryption. I don't want to get too technical, but everything is tokenized from the validators all the way to the data centers. We use point-to-point encryption. We have hardware devices called hardware security modules, which crypt and decrypt and handle all the keys. We have transport layer securities. And in the back end, in the databases, all of the data is stored pretty much on encrypted drives. So we have a high level of security for the data in Omni.
Yeah, just to add on to what Dante said, another thing that we're very proud of with the Omni system is it is the first transit system that is certified to the current P2P standards.
Christian, for people who don't know what P2P is, I think you just have to say a little more.
Sorry, point-to-point encryption, which is the highest standard of PCI.
So just to elaborate on that, I'd like to say, we've been working closely with the banking industries, the financial industry, and anybody that's been following the news lately, you've heard about breaches, you've heard about hacks. Anybody who's, let's just put it to you this way, anybody who's involved in system design has to have an eye towards, question is not if you'll get hacked, question is when you get hacked. And so the point is, if the Omni system is ever hacked, let's make sure that the data, the customer's data that needs to be secure and private, let's make sure that the data is encrypted, tokenized, scrambled in some way so that even if the data is extracted from the system, that if you don't have a way to decrypt the data is really basically a bunch of gobbledygook. It's not useful to anybody, so that even if they figure out a way to pull the data is useless because there's no way for them to decrypt the data. So that's essentially, and that's really a large part of what the industry is trying to do in general, is to make sure that the data is not open, that the data is not sitting out there somewhere along the path, so that somebody can kind of sniff it out and get access to your data. I think that covered most of the questions that I saw. So if Kendra, if you want to field some more.
Yes, thank you. So a question that I saw that was really interesting was, have you guys noticed any trends in the data you found? Like how many taps were of locals? How many were tourists? What kind of trends have you noticed in the data so far?
So we don't really know who's using the card. It really is kind of anonymous. I mean, we send your account number to the bank, and the bank pays us essentially, and then we scramble your account number, and it's, so we're not really keeping track of different types of customers. However, what I would say is one statistic, and I believe that the number is 131. What we have been able to determine that credit cards and debit cards from more than 130 countries around the world have been used in the system. So that's a testament to New York being a multicultural location, and a location that even during a COVID crisis, that tourists are using their cards. And if you think about it, this is the first time where a tourist can walk into a subway station, and also keeping in mind that contactless cards are something that have been used already for a long time in both Europe and Asia. So the idea that they see a device, they see the contactless tap symbol, tap here, and a tourist that doesn't have to speak English, they can see the symbol, they can go directly to the turnstile and start using the system without waiting on a vending machine line. So the first thing we have noticed is that cards are being used from all around the world. So that was very, again, it was both enlightening and heartening, I should say. The other thing, the expected thing is that at the big midtown stations where you would expect, a lot of usage, we're getting a lot of usage, like at the Grand Central and at Times Square, anything or near a major tourist site. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that has really jumped out at me recently. I guess the fact that I commented on earlier, that from the beginning of the year, the buses, the last two boroughs came on sort of really at the tail end, and that's, Eddie's people were working. They were working in the subways, but it was the buses that were really the challenge to complete by the end of the year. So the buses have completely been on in terms of all the boroughs only since the beginning of this year, and the fact that Omni taps on buses have risen by more than 200% since the beginning of the year is also the other kind of fun fact that really surprised me.
Great, thank you. Another question is, will we be able to move money from MetroCards to an Omni card when the MetroCard is retired? Or do you have to mail in a MetroCard for refunds? Will Omni capability be added to the current vending machines the way past MetroCard machines can work with its smart card, or will they be separate?
Wow, that's more than one question, Kendra.
I know, I should have said it was a
combo question. First question first. MetroCard is a very old system, and actually designing an interface to have the two systems talk to each other, other than even in the turnstiles, even though they're both in the turnstile, MetroCard and Omni, the two systems don't really talk to each other. So, and to build an interface, that would be an additional expense. So there's really no plan to actually transfer balances from MetroCard to Omni. Don't worry, we're giving you plenty of time to use up your MetroCards and then to buy your Omni card. And also, I'm sure there will, although the details have not been worked out at this point. There are discussions about, how MetroCards would be redeemed after MetroCards are retired. So, but the good strategy would be to use up your MetroCard and then move over to Omni long before MetroCard is retired.
great.
What was the second question again? I'm sorry. Oh,
I know. It was
there are no plans. There are no plans to utilize the existing vending machines The vending, unlike the turnstiles where we layered on the new technology, we will be putting out new vending machines, and that's and one of the goals of that is also again to establish consistency in terms of the machines that are used for Metro North, Long Island Railroad, and New York City Transit.
Great, thank you. Someone asks, when will unlimited use plans be available through Omni?
So we're looking to introduce alternate or additional fare products later this year. A lot depends on fare policy and fare change discussions that are currently in process, but essentially the technology is there. That's another thing my former boss used to say. Omni provides the technology, and then the agencies get to make the policies, you know, in terms of how that technology is used. So at some point, it's less critical. What I will say is it's less critical or been less critical during the pandemic, because people who would traditionally use, you know, a 7-day or a 30-day card actually didn't make sense during the pandemic when people were not working every day of the week, or sometimes working from home and sometimes working in the office. However, I do acknowledge that for the people like the nurses and the bodega owners and everybody that needs to get to work every day, regardless of the pandemic, they're the customers who stuck with the 7-day and the 30-day MetroCards. There are discussions about when 7-day and 30-day privileges will be introduced on Omni, but the final decision hasn't been made yet.
Great, thank you. Speaking of your former boss, he put a question in that says, I don't miss work, but I do miss you guys. The best team I ever had the honor of leading. Just wanted to share that with our attendees. Let's see, there's so many questions here. You might have mentioned this, but will the Omni card expire?
Omni cards will expire just like your credit cards and your wallet expire. But unlike a MetroCard, which has an expiration date of somewhere around 18 months because it's thin and it does get worn, and the mag stripe does get worn out. The Omni cards, because it's contactless and you're not actually, at least in terms of using it for transit, you're not introducing a lot of wear and tear. The cards will have an expiration date probably somewhere between 5 and 7 years.
Great, thank you. We'll take a couple more questions. Someone asked, will Omni readers show the fare deduction when folks are exiting the station? You know, like, the Washington Metro does that. Is there other plans for the Omni system to do that as well?
I feel like I'm answering all the questions, but we're gonna find a question that I can throw to my colleagues sooner or later.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take that one, Wayne, if you want.
Go ahead.
So yeah, that really gets down to the basis of card-based systems versus account-based systems, and one of the reasons that Omni can operate at the speed at which it does, which I always see people on social media commenting on that, is because of the interaction that happens between the card or the device and the reader, and the carry-on action that will happen with the back-end system to price those journeys. That's also what allows you to do transfers. I know there was another question about transfers, where in the MetroCard world, you're writing and reading to the card and carrying that information with you. With Omni, you're in an account-based system, so that card that you're traveling with is essentially your token to that account, and it's matching your transactions up in the back end with the account. Because of that, it's just making the decisions whether or not to let you in or not let you in through a gate or on a bus. But in terms of all of the pricing of what's in your account, the ability to reload your account, those are all things that are happening on a higher level outside of the card. And because of that, you're not getting that direct information of what's on the card. It's really more real time of what's in your account. Now, you can always go into your account, you can check the level of the account, whether you're going to be using the website or call center or something along those lines. But in terms of the validator, that's just, or the reader, I should say, that's just going to be giving you indication as to whether you can go or have been rejected for whatever reason.
Right, so the short answer is it's just gonna say go at the reader because the reader doesn't know whether you're actually paying for that ride or maybe that's a ride that is a transfer from the bus. So it just says go. You can figure that part out later with all the information that's available through several different options.
Great. I think the last question we'll take, someone asked, what happens if there is an energy or network outage?
Question, you want it?
Sure, sure. So, so Omni is a fully redundant system. There is no single point of failure within the system. Won't share more than that, but the system is built to guard against both of the field devices as well as the back end power outages, communication outages. Again, from an account-based perspective, there are elements that the devices can operate independently, and upon resuming communication in the event of a loss like that, it will sync data back up. But it is fully redundant and supports that.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you all so much, Wayne, Christian, Eddie, Dante, for a wonderful presentation this evening. I want to thank you all in the audience for joining us. If you are interested in more Transit Museum programs, please check us out at nytransitmuseum.org. Until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
Thank you.